The lecture hall of the Galactic Academy of Sciences hummed with the low vibration of 17 different life forms settling into their seats. Holographic star maps rotated lazily above each desk, and the recycled air smelled faintly of ammonia, a concession to the Vreth students who sat in the back row, wrapped in their moisture-sealed suits. John didn't notice any of that. He was too busy staring at the girl who had just sat down next to him. She was human. Or at least, she looked human. 2 arms, 2 legs, dark hair pulled back into a braid. But the Academy's student registry hovering above her desk read, Sarah, Origin, Earth, SOL System, Threat Class, Deathworld Native, Tier 1. John was from Valoria, a peaceful garden world where the highest predator was something roughly equivalent to a large rabbit. He had studied xenobiology for 6 years just to earn a seat in this classroom. He was, by every measurable standard, the most academically accomplished student in the room. He was also, as events would prove, profoundly unwise. "You're in my seat," he said. Sarah looked up from her datapad. Her eyes were calm. That should have been the first warning sign. A Tier 1 Deathworld native whose eyes were calm. "The seating chart says open allocation," she replied. "I always sit here." John straightened to his full height, nearly 2 meters, impressive for a Valorian. His pale blue skin flushed slightly darker, the equivalent of a human puffing out their chest. "I was here first. This is my space." Around them, the other students went very, very still. A Kethari student 3 rows back slowly lowered himself beneath his desk. The Kethari were an ancient species, 11,000 years of civilization behind them, and they had learned long ago to recognize the specific silence that preceded a catastrophe. "Okay," Sarah said pleasantly. She didn't move. John's crest spines, vestigial decorative structures along his shoulders, flared outward. On Valoria, this was considered an aggressive display. It worked wonderfully on other Valorians. It had even worked once on a visiting Drinithi dignitary. "I wasn't asking," John said. "I was telling." Sarah set down her datapad. The Kethari student had now fully disappeared beneath his desk. His neighbor, a fluid-form aqualid, had compressed itself into the smallest possible volume and was attempting to look like a decorative water fixture. "You want to fight me?" Sarah said. It wasn't a question. She tilted her head slightly, not with aggression, but with something worse. Curiosity. "Over a seat. I want you to respect the established social hierarchy of this classroom," John said, which was, in hindsight, a remarkable sentence to say to a human. Sarah stood up. She was not tall, not by galactic standards. The top of her head barely reached John's collarbone. She weighed perhaps 62 kilograms. She had no venom glands, no natural armor, no echolocation, no regenerative tissue. By pure biological metrics, she was laughably outclassed by half the species in the room. John made the mistake of knowing this. He reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder to guide her away from the seat. What happened next took approximately 1.4 seconds. Later, after extensive review of the classroom's security footage, the Academy's incident report would describe it as follows. The human student executed a joint manipulation technique that leveraged the subject's own forward momentum against his center of gravity, resulting in a controlled displacement of approximately 2 meters. No malicious intent was determined. The subject was unharmed, aside from his dignity. John found himself on the floor. He had not seen her move. He had felt a shift in pressure at his wrist, a pivot, a brief sensation of weightlessness, and then the cool synthetic tile of the classroom floor against his back. Sarah looked down at him. "I grew up on Earth," she said, conversationally, as though she were explaining something obvious to a child. "Where I'm from, we have things with more teeth than you that we keep as pets. We have weather events that level entire cities that we name and then argue about on social media. We evolved on a world that was actively trying to kill us for 4 million years." She paused. "I'm the least dangerous thing that came from it." John stared at the ceiling. "I would very much like my seat back," Sarah added. "Yes," John said. Professor Vinca, a 3-eyed Silurian who had been teaching xenobiology for 40 years, had watched the entire exchange from the doorway without intervening. This was not negligence. This was, in fact, a carefully considered pedagogical choice. He walked to the front of the class, set down his notes, and looked out at the assembled students. The Kethari cautiously re-emerging from under his desk, the aqualid slowly re-expanding. John returning carefully to his seat 2 rows back. Sarah already re-engaged with her datapad. Today's lecture, Venka said, was supposed to be on adaptive evolution in high-pressure biospheres. He paused. I believe you have already received a practical demonstration. So instead, let us talk about Earth. He pulled up the holographic display. The planet rotated slowly, blue and green and white, deceptively beautiful. Earth is, statistically, the most dangerous habitable planet in the known explored galaxy, Venka said. Not because of its tectonic activity, though that is considerable. Not because of its atmospheric volatility, though hurricanes, tornadoes, and electrical storms kill thousands of its inhabitants each year. Not even because of its wildlife. Though I remind you that Earth contains animals capable of killing most known sapient species through venom alone, and its largest predators consume prey larger than several of you. He let that settle. Earth is the most dangerous planet in the known galaxy because of what it produced. He looked at Sarah. Humans, he said, are what happens when a species spends for a million years not dying. They are not the strongest species on their own world. They are not the fastest, the most venomous, the most armored. They have no natural weapons of consequence. What they have is something far more terrifying. He tapped his temple. Adaptability. And the absolute, unshakable refusal to accept that something is impossible simply because it should be. John had retrieved his datapad from where it had skidded under a desk. He was now taking notes with an expression of focused, slightly humbled attention. Humans invented agriculture, writing, mathematics, rocketry, and nuclear energy in approximately 12,000 years, Venka continued. That is not a typo. 12,000 years. A span of time during which the Cathari were still debating the philosophical implications of the wheel. The Cathari student made a sound of protest. Venka ignored it. They went from their first powered flight to landing on their own moon in 66 years. They split the atom and immediately became concerned about the ethical implications of having done so. He brought up a new image, a photograph. A human man in an orange suit, floating in the black of space, one hand gripping a tether, the other outstretched toward a satellite tumbling in slow rotation. This image, Venka said quietly, is a human. Alone. In vacuum. Repairing a machine traveling at 28,000 kilometers per hour. With hand tools. A long pause. He was worried about being late for dinner. The room was silent. Sarah had stopped reading her datapad. She was smiling at the photograph, the small, private smile of someone looking at something familiar. The galaxy, Venka said, spent a great deal of time before first contact assuming that when we found other sapient life, it would be either hostile and powerful or peaceful and manageable. We found humans. He closed the holographic display. They are peaceful. They are friendly. They will share their food with you and remember your name and ask after your family's health with genuine interest. He folded his hands. They are also the only species in the known galaxy that domesticated a hypercarnivore as a companion animal and then carries pictures of it in their communication devices to show strangers. He looked around the room. Do not, he said gently, make the mistake of confusing kindness with softness. John nodded with great sincerity. After class, he approached Sarah in the corridor. She looked up at him with no particular expression, not triumph, not irritation, just attention. I apologize, he said carefully, for my behavior. It was poorly considered. Sarah shrugged. I've had worse. You're very calm, he said, unable to stop himself. For someone who just, for what you. I'm always calm, Sarah said. She picked up her bag. Panic is for situations I haven't trained for yet. She glanced at him with something that might have been warmth. Good lecture, though. Venka's good. Yes, John agreed. She turned and walked away down the corridor, already pulling out her datapad again, already reading, already moving on. John stood there for a moment. He thought about 4 million years. He thought about the stars humans had crossed to be here, in this hall, in this galaxy, in this story, not because anyone had invited them, but because they had looked up at the night sky and thought, I wonder what's out there, and then gone to find out. He took a breath. Excuse me, he called after her. Sarah looked back. Would you, John said carefully, be interested in a study group? She smiled. Sure, she said. I'll bring snacks. And somewhere across the galaxy, on a pale blue world spinning in unremarkable orbit around an average yellow star, 4 billion humans went about their Wednesday, complaining about traffic, feeding their pet hypercarnivores, and having absolutely no idea that they were, by unanimous consensus of every other sapient species in the known universe, the most terrifying thing anyone had ever encountered. They would have been delighted.